You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy show. My name is Andy Tanner. I'm your host, and this is where we make investing simple. And today's episode's an important episode. When I was young, I was a Boy Scout, so now I'm an overgrown Boy Scout. You know, they say always an eagle. And being prepared is the Scout motto, and that's really helped me as an investor. Many people get caught up in the trap of trying to predict what the market's going to do, or kind of predict what their life is going to do. And I will tell you that, you know, perhaps the defining characteristic of our markets is unpredictability, and that's true in our lives. And so if we are constantly trying to predict the unpredictable, we're going to run into trouble. As a matter of fact, people will look and say, well, Andrew, you worried about our fiscal situation? Yeah, I'm worried about it. I can see storm clouds out there. They say, Andy, you worried about our monetary policy? Oh, yeah, I see storm clouds out there. In fact, I see storm clouds in liquidity, storm clouds in, you know, what's going to happen with robotics, artificial intelligence. So, yeah, they go, but what is the thing that bothers you most? And I often will tell people, well, it's the one I haven't thought of yet. And so being prepared and looking at the road for both the opportunity but also the things that can go wrong, we're going to talk about being prepared for anything. And today we have a wonderful guest. His name is Frank Supovitz. And it's just fantastic to be with you, Frank. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Andy. Thank you for having me.
The topic here is where things go wrong, and Frank is the author of What to Do When Things Go Wrong, a 5-step guide to planning for surviving the inevitable and coming out ahead. His website is fasttrafficevents.com. And so again, we thank you for being on the show. Would you mind just giving a little bit of your history? Talk about, you know, how you became interested in this type of topic, and why did you decide there was a book to be written on it?
Well, I'm delighted to. So I think that I'll start with why the book got written, and that will help take us through the background, which is going to be interesting only when you hear that. So for about a decade, I was in charge of the National Football League's event group. And part of our job was the planning and managing and ultimately the execution of the Super Bowl. You've probably heard about that.
You better believe it.
So Super Bowl, the NFL draft, international competitions, all of those kinds of things. And, you know, when you deal with a Super Bowl, it's a project of pretty big magnitude. And it's a project. And we're all project managers in business or in life, even if that's not our job title. So whether we're planning a new ad campaign or a product launch, a wedding, even reviewing and rescaling an investment strategy, they're all made up of tons of details. And any one of those details can go south on us, whether it's our fault or not, whether it's something we did think about or didn't think about. My projects were major sports and entertainment events, and things go wrong all the time, in real time, and often with millions of people watching. And that's what inspired the book. So every Super Bowl, something somewhere, because there were millions of details, went wrong. And more often than not, you never saw them. You never heard about them. It was something that we dealt with, you know, on a minute-to-minute basis in some cases. But in one case, everybody found out about it around the same time I did, which was the blackout at the Super Bowl in New Orleans at the Superdome.
Right.
And how we responded to that crisis for our business. Where we had to stop an international television broadcast. There were 70,000 people in the building. There were 110 million people watching on television. Everybody had a theory as to what was going on. And there was a real question as to whether we were ever going to get that game back up and running. As a matter of fact, I had a Armin Katayan from 60 Minutes standing right next to me at the time that the lights went out. So,
oh boy.
It's usually not a great day when 60 Minutes is knocking on your door. Well, they're standing right next to me at that particular moment. And they were able to document our response. I really kind of forgot about them while we were responding, but they documented it, and I'm glad they did, because had they not, I would have never remembered the majority of what unfolded at that point, but they had the ability to ultimately document that response. And, in taking that situation apart in my mind, I started to realize that there is a story to be told about how you respond to crises and how you plan for them. And even more importantly, which we'll talk about in a moment, how you imagine these things happening to you and how you better inform your planning with that step.
This is so much fun and so exciting because I feel like, boy, if I could have some principles, and if I'm listening to the podcast right now, I think if I could just have some guides and some principles for when things go wrong, anything from a traffic accident to, something happens in my business and I'm blindsided, this is going to be a lot of fun. And one of the benefits of 2020 is, people get the chance to. There's a. I shouldn't use the word humiliation. There's a humbling effect though. We're like, wow, we're vulnerable. There's a, I guess humility is just understanding your place in the universe accurately, right? Just saying, wow, there's things that can go wrong, and so what an opportunity when we have our human family go through some difficult times to say, what's going on? So, first of all, how's 2020 been for you as a crisis manager? This would be interesting.
Well, it was actually very challenging, as you might imagine. So my business today at Fast Traffic is the creation, management, and production of major entertainment events. Well, major entertainment events usually have a lot of people. And, one of the events that we produce along with Indianapolis Motor Speedway is the Indy 500 pre-race show.
Oh, wow.
So you have about 300,000 people at the Speedway for that event. Clearly, that was not advisable this year. They postponed the event to, from May, when it's usually on Memorial Day weekend. They postponed it to August, and ultimately, about 3 weeks before the race began, they determined that it was just not advisable to have people at the Speedway. So, I stepped aside at that point to enable them to just produce a televised race with a minimum of live entertainment and live content. So that was challenging. I would say that 90% of our clients went into hibernation, and all of that makes sense. They did it for all the right reasons. We talked a little bit earlier about imagining, and you were looking for some pointers or guidelines or et cetera. And you mentioned that the book, What to Do When Things Go Wrong, is a 5-step guide. The first step is not putting your plan together. Everybody believes that planning is the first thing you do. It actually isn't. Planning is a roadmap that gets you from point A to point B and onward to whatever your end goal is.
Right.
But what if not everything goes according to your plan? That's why imagining is really the first thing you do. So you kind of step back a bit and imagine the challenges and obstacles that can get in our way, and then we can develop contingencies for what we would do when something goes south. But more importantly, we can develop a better plan in the first place. So let's talk about COVID because that's, uppermost in everybody's minds right now. We could not have imagined a global pandemic of the scope and scale that we've just experienced and that we are currently experiencing. But we could imagine all of the more generalized symptoms, if you will, of what COVID-19 means to us today in our businesses. In other words, although we couldn't predict a pandemic, many of us have been prepared for all of the symptoms that are much more familiar, like an economic downturn, an inability to get to our workplaces. Things of that nature are symptoms of COVID and the pandemic, but they are not the pandemic. So although problems don't follow patterns, solutions usually do. And because there are no unique symptoms, there are a lot of common symptoms that really cover a lot of different situations. So one of the things we talk about in the book is the notion of preparing for anything, but not everything. Right? So you're not preparing for a pandemic. You're preparing for all of the things that can flow out of a pandemic, but it could also flow out of a period of civil unrest. It could flow out of a fire, or a community disaster, or natural disaster, a blizzard, all of those things. And that's a real core concept, is preparing for the more generalized symptoms of those things and imagining how you would respond to those when you start to put your plan together.
Well, I love the idea of generalized principles, and those are two big points that I think it'd be great to dwell on just for a little bit. You said two things that are great, that are notable, is that problems don't come in an organized, pattern, but there is a pattern to solutions, and planning for everything, not everything. And there's I'm so excited to, dive into this book for 2021. My poor listeners know that I was a broken down basketball player who wasn't very good, but I love that game. And it's, when I coach it now, and I coach the youth teams, one of the things we talk about is a phrase called, we'll deal with what emerges. Just a mindset of positivity, that when things, start to fall to pieces and we might not know what to do, so look, we can deal with this. When I was a public speaker, I got that phrase from a speaker coach of mine, because the mic's going to go wrong, or the fire alarm's going to go off, or someone's going to have a seizure in the audience, or whatever. And I love that idea of planning for anything. You just deal with what emerges. So would you mind delving just a little bit, maybe an example of a pattern, of a solution, maybe just one example?
Well, I'll give you one out of Super Bowl land again, because
awesome.
it relates to the core story that we visit a few times in the book. But I will say that plenty has gone wrong for me beyond a blackout at the Super Bowl and prior parts of my career when I was the head of events for the National Hockey League and other things. It's
a when I think of the scale of that thing, I had a good friend that invited me, and we went to Super Bowl 50. It's a kind of a nice anniversary, and as I was going around, just before the game, I was thinking of the logistics and the amount of things that needed to happen. It's like building a space shuttle. A lot of stuff has to go right for this thing to work. So I'm excited to hear this.
Well, and that's right. So in working on the Super Bowl, we also had a lot of contingency plans. And what we determined in other years was contingency plans look great on paper.
Yeah.
You don't really know that they're actionable until you really step your way through it. It's really very tempting to say, yeah, I have a contingency plan. Here it is. If you haven't tried to simulate, either as a tabletop exercise, discussing it with other people, or even stepping through it in your mind, it's really not that great a security blanket until you've done that. Otherwise, you have a great plan that just you can't possibly enact, and that you can't possibly move forward to. So you have to be careful about how you construct those contingencies. In the case of Super Bowl, we actually had about 10 days before every year's game, we would have a tabletop exercise where everyone who was in a decision-making capacity and the people that they would talk to to execute those decisions would be in a room together for 4 hours, and we hired a moderator or a facilitator to throw disasters at us. He became very familiar with our operations plan, and he would poke holes, wherever he could. And I really believe today that the reason that we were able to respond to the blackout in a very coherent, measured way, in a way that we were responding but not reacting, not panicking,
right,
was because of that exercise. And if you go back and look at the game tape, if you will, of 60 Minutes Sports, behind the scenes watching all of this, we really didn't try to re-energize the Superdome right away. What we were really focused on is, what do we tell people? Mm-hmm. Because what you really have to do immediately in a situation like that, when you've got 70,000 people in the building, is you have to determine whether it's a safe environment. If it is safe, you want people to stay. If it's not safe, you want people to go. Those are decisions you have to make very quickly. Right. And whether or not you can actually re-energize, the power distribution in the building. Having those kinds of contingencies where you've got that kind of generalized approach, something bad happened, what do you tell people? That's the first thing you have to think about. And so that was the first thing we did think about while law enforcement and security was trying to figure out whether it was a terrorist incident or a cyber terror incident, and whether the operations and engineering groups were trying to figure out if they could get the plug back in the wall. We were trying to figure out, what do you tell people in the meantime?
That's a great, great example for COVID. It was interesting to watch the response to COVID from the United States. We had some, people that you never knew before, become famous all of a sudden, right? Like who's Dr. Fauci? I have no idea who this guy is, And it was interesting because, and I like your opinion on this, what do you tell people? Because when you're dealing with mass people, my default setting is, the truth sets you free. It always, always tell the truth, always tell the truth. And yet, there's often people can fall into the idea of in their mind, they don't Google what are the facts, what is true. They Google, well, how will people respond? And that's how lies happen, I think, in business and in marriages. And, if I make a mistake, for example, that could be a crisis. If I make a mistake and I tell someone, they may or may not forgive me. So I might make up a story, and then you get into fibbing and stuff. So I thought it was interesting when it came out. The message was, there's all these videos that they pop up now. Well, you don't need a mask. No one needs a mask. Masks, that you fiddle with them and they can actually make it worse, and because you touch your face more. And, it's really for, when a surgeon is there, it's really for him not to contaminate you. It doesn't protect the surgeon and blah, blah, blah. And then, a few months later, it's like, we're begging everyone to get a mask. So, how you communicate, what is your opinion? Do you go for rhetoric, which is an outcome that you want, a response that you want, or do you just tell people the truth? And what did you tell people at the Super Bowl?
Well, we determined, and I'll deal with that and then get back to the COVID question. What we determined within a few minutes was that it was a mechanical failure, and it was not something that was a result of a disaster, a fire, an explosion, a terrorist incident, a cyber terror incident.
Yeah.
That was something we determined pretty quickly. In the meantime, we were writing the script that we wanted the public address announcer to deliver.
Right.
And the way we were able to do that in a power failure is because one of the great things about stadium design is that most will have a battery backup for the public address system because of this.
Right.
If there's a power failure, you still want to be able to talk to people, and there's a plan for that in most stadiums. Certainly, I think most stadiums in the United States. So what we did tell them was, to hang out, that the power has been interrupted, that we're working on the situation. Sorry for the inconvenience. And for that reason, people did not leave the building, because if they had, getting them back in the building would have been near impossible. given the security status of what a Super Bowl is and the screening and all of that. So that was, we did that relatively quickly. It seemed like a long time in my memory, but in the documentation, it really does demonstrate that we reacted to that or responded to that very quickly. Then it was a question of, all right, what do we have to do, and can we get the game back going again? We didn't address that for the audience. The other reason you have to do these things really quickly is because news travels incredibly fast.
Oh, yeah.
Over the social media.
Oh, yeah.
And people were receiving all kinds of input from places outside the building about what was going on. And in the beginning, there was a lot of misinformation out there, and that's just the nature of social media, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
We wanted to make sure that we were the authority in providing information, and more importantly, what we were doing was providing guidance. We weren't really providing information because we didn't have any. We were providing guidance.
Yep.
What should you do?
Yep.
You're safe being here was the overall message that we were trying to relate. And in terms of the question of truth or dare, truth does win out, every time. But the fact is, you may not know what the truth is. And I'm not defending or attacking anything that had been done by the CDC or anybody else. They didn't know. They didn't know how the disease was transmitted. So they were creating a narrative that was trying to be as safe as possible, because at the end of the day, and this is true if you're managing a pandemic or you're managing the Super Bowl, the most important thing that you have to be is safe. It's a non-negotiable. Safety is key no matter what. If it was a choice between getting a game going again and being safe, and you couldn't do both of those things, you go with safe, right? There's no question about it. So, they just didn't know what was going to keep you safe, and they were relying on the patchy information that they had because they just didn't know enough about this disease at the time that they were issuing those directives. They were trying their best to be proportional and try to figure out what the safest thing was based on the information that they had.
Yeah, I mean, I think about mass. This is a dealing with millions and millions of people, and the question is, whether it's 70 million or 70,000 people in a stadium or 300 million people in a country. Can you trust people? I think they probably had a pretty good idea that, viruses travel, through the air, and, flus travel through the air, and that masks prevent that. But I think their fear was if they say, it would give protection from spreading this if we wore a mask. I think the problem is they had not prepared for this in terms of masks. They thought, we need these for our healthcare professionals. We need these people for people on the front line. And if we say, yes, get a mask at this point, I don't think they had trust in the people, which might have been justified, because if everyone goes out and hoards these, then it can make, so they were in kind of a rough dilemma because, the public says, well, tell us the truth, but often the public, we don't do well with the truth sometimes. So it's an interesting dilemma for sure. So you talk.
Looking back on that though, Andy, there was also the question of whether viruses from your breathing or droplets or anything else was going to survive on surfaces. Yeah. And so what they were also balancing, I believe at the time, was the question, well, if I keep touching my face after I've touched a surface out in the world, is that going to create a vector for infection? That's, I think, what they were also trying to deal with at the time.
So you speak about Plan B, Plan C, Plan Ds, and I absolutely love the title of Chapter 7. This title of Chapter 7, it has a practicality to it, and we say this in the trading world and in the business world. We say this all the time. Hope is not a strategy. Why do people fall? You put that in there for a reason because, for example, a 401k. Someone invests in 401k and they hope the market's going to go up. It's out of their hands. Someone buys an IPO and they hope that it does well. It's out of their hands. Can you talk a little bit about, I love that title, talk a little bit about hope. Hope is not a strategy.
No, it really isn't. And hope kind of stops you from imagining and planning because you say, well, I hope it's going to be okay. I hope that my 401k is going to be okay. Well, you can't rely on that. What if it's not?
Yeah.
And under what conditions would you make a change? Under what conditions would you call Andy? And what are those early warning signs that you have to take into account? This helps you respond rather than react. If you're ready, if you know what you're going to respond to, you don't have to react. Reaction is an involuntary, instinctual type of a response where you're not thinking about anything, right? Adrenaline takes over because you're starting to panic.
Yeah.
And panic absolutely paralyzes good decision making. If you're leading a group, those around you, if you panic, they're going to either panic too, or they're just going to plain out ignore you. What you're trying to do is to respond. And you can respond better if you know what your options are before something goes wrong. Responding is much more thoughtful. It's much more thoughtful than reacting.
Yes.
And you need a minute or two. And I'll give you a good example of the difference between responding and reacting. So the blackout at the Super Bowl was 24 minutes long. Mm-hmm. But the game was delayed for 34 minutes, so it was another 10 minutes. Now, imagine how tantalizing it was when CBS is constantly calling you. They want to get the game going again. They're losing viewership, or potentially losing viewership. I don't think they really lost that many, as it turned out. But you've got an enormous amount of pressure. Well, the lights are back on. How come you're not teeing up the ball and kicking it off? Because this happened right after a touchdown, so It would have been a kickoff was going to be the next play. And the fact was that we waited because during those 24 minutes we said, you know what? The lights are not the only thing that went off. Everything that needed power went off.
Yeah.
So will the score clock work? Will the coach to quarterback system work? Will the instant replay systems work? Well, what if we did kick off the ball at 24 minutes and instant replay didn't work and there was another score or there was a controversial play and the officials go under the hood and they don't have instant replay? Now what's the story of the game? It's not about the power failure, right? Now it could be a conspiracy. What did the league do and why did they do that? Yeah. So we really resisted the notion of getting the game going immediately after the lights went on because we knew ahead of time what do we need to make a game a game? What's that checklist? And the fact of the matter is, during that 10 minutes, we checked every system in the building that you needed. And sure enough, one of the coach to quarterback systems did not work. So we spent the time fixing it. And this is the kind of process that you go through if you're prepared to respond instead of just reacting.
The title of the book is What to Do When Things Go Wrong, a 5-step guide to planning and surviving the inevitable. It's available on Amazon.com. And you can also take advantage by visiting the website. And that is fasttrafficevents.com. I think as we close, one of the challenges of human nature, and I think it might relate to hope is not a strategy, is it's often unpleasant to picture and imagine bad things happening. Our brains are interesting. We can go to a movie and watch Freddy Krueger, and our body responds as if it's real. It's really just light waves being bounced off a screen. It's just someone's imagination. Actors aren't real. Story is preposterous. And yet my subconscious mind says, I think Freddy Krueger's probably in my closet, going to get me. And so to take people to these places of preparation is often resistance. One of the things I learned, I don't know the answer to it, but I thought it was fascinating how many people, I'm in the education business, and I teach people how to manage risk in their investments. And when last March, when COVID started to spread around the world, and Italy got really locked down, and different places in the world began to be hot spots, everyone all of a sudden was interested in learning how to manage risk. And the problem is the car crash is not the time to learn how a seatbelt works. And I think one of the difficult challenges I've had, I've told people, does it make sense to invest in things you don't understand? Is investing a life skill or something you're going to hire out to someone who wants to take on your account as a salesman? And trying to help people understand the realities of crashes and how we respond to them. I felt our team responded. I give them really one of the great moments in their careers of really knowing how to respond to the stock market and understand that this is a bargain. This is not a time to panic. Trying to convince people of that was almost impossible. So could you speak as our last thing is, is there going to be another crisis of some kind? I think you could guarantee that there is always a probability, not just a possibility, but the world is chaotic. How do you make the appeal to your clients when they say, hey, help us out? How do you get them to take these things seriously and understand that the time to do this is when the waters are calm, when we can think clearly and prepare? It's not it's not when the storm hits you.
It's funny you should mention that, because I do quite a lot of public speaking on this subject, although it's not what I do for a living. What I do for a living is actually produce major entertainment events, major sports events. Right. But crisis planning, crisis management is something that I, for really unfortunate reasons, became an expert on. And what I always tell people at the end of a presentation, or I had, was, if it hasn't happened to you, it just hasn't happened to you yet.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a probability. It's a certainty. Something is coming your way. Will there be something as potentially devastating to our businesses, to our portfolios, to our lives as COVID? Yeah, there will be. We don't know when it is. It could be a year from now. It could be 5 years from now. It could be 10 years from now. It could be next Tuesday. You have to be prepared. And the fact is that just because you just suffered through this pandemic does not automatically inoculate you against the next problem. So, this is the best time to start thinking about what the next problem could be in that very generalized way. Well, what do I do next time my stock portfolio drops by 25%? What do I need to look for to determine what my next step is going to be? What do I do about my business when my business's stock falls? What do I need to do when our revenues disappear? What am I going to do in terms of trimming expenses? What's my strategy going to be? So this is the time to be strategic about the next time, because we know now what it was like to get smacked in the face with this. We're going to get smacked in the face again. We just have to be in a much more defensive position.
It takes time to build a team that is a super team. And in Chapter 11, you hit this really well. It takes time to build a super team. And, you think about your legal team. If you're a business, having a legal team, asset protections against lawsuit, insurance of all kinds, based on what, insurance gives you some surety in unsure times. That's, you're insured. And so building a team takes time, and investing in business is definitely a team sport. Having an accountant, having an attorney, having an asset protection attorney, having estate planning, all types of things. It takes time to build a team. And so to be able to, execute plans and respond rather than react. And then, we have the chance to evaluate now what happened with COVID and say, well, how can we make it better? So to learn more about this, wouldn't it be fun to go hang out with Frank and visit with him? Well, you can. He's got a wonderful book, and there's five steps. What do you do when things go wrong? I think now would be the time to read this book, not when there's the fire. So
that's right.
Go to Amazon.com, pick up a copy, and gain value from the insight of someone who has become an expert in this field. Frank, thank you again. You've been so gracious, and just a really interesting conversation that I really know that every listener, it gives you food for thought. And I really hope that there was a determination perhaps as we spoke in your heart to say, I am going to study how to prepare, and I'm not just going to sigh. There's going to be people that say, oh, we're going to have a vaccine now, things are going to be fine, everything's fine now. A lot of people say, you know what, I'm going to take this as, I'm not going to be one of those people. I'm going to be a person that doesn't panic, but says, I think I'll learn from this COVID experience and get myself, some study materials so I can be even better prepared when things go wrong. Frank, thank you again. You're just delightful. Any final words for our listeners before we close?
Now is the time, my friends. Like I said, if it hasn't happened to you, it hasn't happened to you yet. So even if COVID did not bring you to the ground, something around the corner may. So it is time to start thinking about those kinds of issues and how you're going to respond to them. Thank you, Andy, for having me.
Thanks, Frank. You've been listening to the Cashflow Academy podcast, where we make investing simple. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Cashflow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.